Second, any discussion or additions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. I know we had to change the time to accommodate folks' schedules. Appreciate everybody's flexibility. We'll be starting with economic analysis and personal income forecast update from Mr. Anirban Basu. When you're ready.
Right. Thank you, Councilman. My name is Anirban Basu again. And so, we just met, as it turns out. Not that much has happened except an inauguration. And then on January 20th, the date of the inauguration, the newly inaugurated president issued 26 executive orders. Now, some of them, many of them are of no consequence to what we're talking about today, but at least two of them have some consequence. One was that federal workers are now required to show up in the office. And one can question, what the motivations are behind that. But my guess is that that would induce some federal workers to quit their positions, having become accustomed to not commuting, whether in Fairfax County or the Baltimore region or wherever, to Woodlawn or wherever they're going. There might be some attrition there. And that matters, obviously, from a personal income perspective, because fewer workers, less income tax collections. And that would be the first order impact of that. And then another thing that the president did, a newly inaugurated president, is to issue forth a freeze on federal hiring, with the exception of people who work in Homeland Security or National Defense, those kinds of things. And that also could lead to further reduction over time in the federal workforce, just lack of hiring, for instance, to replace workers that are leaving their jobs behind for various reasons. And so, we've not yet factored those things into our personal income forecast. Too soon to do that. But, it is still the case that we think it's going to be a decent year for the U.S. economy in 2025. And in fact, one of the things that's happened since we last met not that long ago is that the International Monetary Fund has upgraded its forecast for U.S. economic growth from 2.2% growth expected for 2025 to 2.7%. That's a fairly significant adjustment to a forecast over a very short period of time. And it speaks to the ongoing momentum of the U.S. economy. So we continue to project personal income growth in Baltimore County of between 4 and 4.5% over the next 3 fiscal years. Much of that strength rests with the labor market and expected significant wage growth going forward. We don't expect, because of issues related to housing in particular, a lot of in-migration into Baltimore County. We've talked about this before, the low inventory of unsold homes. And actually, lately, mortgage rates have been rising, making it that much more difficult for buyers to buy homes in Baltimore County, to the extent that there is inventory available. So in any case, that is the broad outline of the report. I'll take whatever questions you have in our remaining time together.
Questions for Mr. Basu?
I'm glad you didn't make mention of the not only the freeze on
Ed, if you press your button.
not only the freeze on federal employment, but the beginning of layoffs and curtailments, i.e., he announced on the DEI as one example. The Department of Health is undergoing some significant changes over in the Bethesda area in terms of their own employment, as the CDC and others are revamping downward since they stopped issuing or were allowed to issue any reports. So in the context of, yes, there is good national growth with lots of components from A to Z, can you still say that we're going to participate strongly in that growth if that comes about?
Well, as you know, we have not been participating strongly in that growth. So as an example, since February of 2020, America's added almost precisely 7 million jobs. February of 2020 is the month before we shut down the economy. So I'm using that as the pre-pandemic baseline. Maryland over that same period lost 7,000 jobs. So we have not been participating. And because we're roughly 2% of the nation's economy over that period, if we added jobs as an average state would have, so I'm not talking about the job growth in Tennessee or Texas or Florida or Arizona, I'm talking about an average state, we should have added about 140,000 jobs. We lost about 7,000. So we're about 150,000 jobs short as a state relative to where we ought to be if we performed as an average state in terms of job creation. So we've not been participating. A lot of that, again, has to do with our housing market. We just don't have enough housing to accommodate more population, to drive labor force growth, to drive job creation. And there are probably some other issues with respect to our business climate that also cause this kind of outcome. But like I say, it's too soon to build all of this into our personal income forecast. I mean, there have been shifts in terms of immigration policy. We know that sort of very high-profile deportations have begun. Yes, you're right. Federal DEI jobs have apparently been, those workers have been put on paid administrative leave, as I understand it. And in fact, federal employees are have an obligation, apparently, according to an executive order, to report workers that they think are DEI workers but are not listed as such or have changed their job profiles, that kind of thing. So their job description. So yeah, there's lots of tumults out there, including with respect to the federal government workforce. But our personal income forecast is based on the notion that the unemployment rate is still very low, that employers that are trying to cobble together workforce still have to pay substantially for those workers to retain them. That translates into wage growth. So it's not about overall Maryland economic growth. It's just the labor market is very tight. Low rates of unemployment, often the low 3s or the high 2s in many jurisdictions across Maryland. The same is true for Baltimore County. It's been in the low 3s in terms of unemployment, and that translates into faster wage growth. And that's about half of the personal income number is wages and salaries. And so that's why we continue to predict something a bit above 4% in terms of personal income growth for the next fiscal year.
Anything to add with regard to the state's developments, their cutback proposal, reduction proposals of having an effect on 25, 26, 27?
Look, I mean, sure. I mean, again, it's a lot of this is speculative. So you may have seen the article this morning about Frostburg State University and its fiscal issues and having to lay off staff. I'm not saying the same thing is going to happen at UMBC or at Towson University, but obviously things are tighter in higher education and in many segments financed in whole or in part by state government. So again, I don't think the forecast is too optimistic. I mean, because just the structure of the labor market and how hard it is to find workers. And again, Baltimore County has a fairly elderly age profile, older than average age profile. So we have a disproportionate number of retirements every year from our labor force, and that creates job openings, even in the absence of aggregate economic growth, and that creates upward pressure on wages. But to your question, there's a lot of possible downside risk to the outlook, as it turns out, much of it coming from the new administration in Washington, D.C. It's not my place, by the way, to critique those policies. I'm not saying they're good or bad. That's not my place. But clearly they'll have some economic impact. And many of those economic impacts, I suspect, may be negative in terms of job creation, again, because we depend so much on government spending, whether federal and state. And so you look around and you say, there's some downside risk there. But I mean, we will have to take that up with our next forecast, and we will. We're looking at this, but we're very much early days in the Trump administration. This is day 8, as it turns out, and so we're still trying to puzzle this together.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No problem. Further questions for Mr. Basu? No, hearing none. Sir, thank you again for participating and your flexibility. I hear you're going on a trip. Be safe and safe travels.
Thank you so much, Mr. Councilman, and thanks to the other councilman, Councilman Marks. Good to see you as well. So thanks. Have a great year. See you soon.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Moving on to committee staff, general fund fiscal update. Liz?
Sure. Fiscal year 2024 revenues totaled $2.69 billion, which was $146.5 million above budgeted revenues. Revenues for fiscal year 2025 are projected to come in approximately $170 million above budgeted revenues, which is approximately $53.5 million above fiscal year 2024 collections and $200 million above the fiscal year 2024 budget. Fiscal year 2025 is still showing growth in ongoing collections despite persistently elevated interest rates and the effect on the housing market. Fiscal year 2026 revenues are conservatively projected to total more than $2.8 billion, reflecting growth of more than 3%, about $85 million over the current fiscal year 2025 estimate, and nearly 10% or over $250 million above the fiscal year 2025 budget. I'm talking about revenues because it's important. The Spending Affordability Committee always looks at its guidelines, the spending guidelines that it's considering. The spending guidelines are for ongoing spending and compares that ongoing spending to ongoing revenues. The Office of Budget and Finance's October 2024 forecast for general fund revenues was $2.75 billion. And all of these figures that we're talking about for fiscal year 2026, that was their FY 2026 forecast as of October, which was before a pretty positive November distribution of income tax revenue from the state. And all of these figures are above the spending guidelines that are being considered that we're going to turn to next on the agenda. But first, any questions on the fiscal update?
Any questions? Any questions for Liz on the fiscal update? Seeing none, go ahead.
Okay. So the spending guidelines, I emailed 3 alternative guidelines that were being looked at. SAGE's 5-year fiscal year 22 to 26 average, which was 4.76%. That would yield a spending guideline of $2.733 billion and some change, yielding a maximum growth in base spending of approximately $124.1 million. Also, there was another alternative of using Moody's 5-year average, which we converted calendar year to fiscal year, but actually the calendar year numbers were pretty in line with the fiscal year numbers. We did that conversion. It's 5.22%. That would yield a spending guideline of $2.745 billion, maximum growth in base spending of $136.2 million. Then we did a blended average of SAGE and Moody's, which was 4.99%. That would yield a guideline of $2.739 billion, and that's $130.2 million growth, maximum growth in base spending. And then finally, a 4th version, which hasn't been emailed, just sort of simplifies that blended version, rounds down to 4.9%, and that would yield a spending guideline of $2.737 billion, which is maximum growth in base spending of $127.9 million. So those are the 4. I had emailed 3 alternatives. To the members who are online, I also forwarded the 4th one, the 4.9%. And I have one printout of that, which we can pass around the table here. Meant to print more out.
It just gives detail to the numbers that she
4.9%.
right, that Liz just described.
So those are the 4 that we were looking at. And as I said, all of these spending guidelines apply to base spending, to ongoing spending, and all the ongoing spending, these guidelines are less than projected ongoing revenues for FY26.
Great. Questions for Liz related to the averages and blended averages?
Liz, could you compare this against what the Office of Finance is looking at?
It was my understanding that they were looking at Moody's, and I don't know if Mr. Chairman wants to speak more as far as conversations with the Office of Budget and Finance.
Sure, yeah. So in conversations, one with the department and also us using 2 different organizations to come up with our own numbers, there was a request, even though their numbers came up to 5.2% in terms of what we could handle, we agreed, and they were also asking for about a 4.9% increase, which falls right in line with the blended average between the 2, which is sort of the approach we took last year. Well, it is the approach we took last year, took a blended
There's
average.
a meeting of the minds and
Right.
measures rather than bigger than a bread box. And
Oh, right, yeah.
figure out how to fill the difference.
Right. Yeah, we had met since the first meeting, going back and forth, one about our concerns related to spending guidelines, but also uncertainty associated with the economy. And what Mr. Basu also sort of has laid out over the last 3 meetings, and that, one, the will of this committee and the individual members and our own concerns, bringing that to the department's attention, we all agreed and came to an agreement of 4.9, which was a good compromise for, one, both our agencies, both the folks we have paid to then give us a recommendation, but also for what our needs are moving into the next fiscal year. So.
Now, within their view, being the Office of Finance, there's still, as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, a budgetary use of your good reserves now. And my understanding from the materials that I had read that it could go down to 10%, which is kind of the floor where I was rereading the rating agencies' materials. The concern that a couple of the agencies had, both Moody's, had indicated that they were putting on a kind of a looking forward that if you went down too close or top of the 10%, along with the unfunded pension liability and a couple other things, that at least in their historical write-ups, nothing else there, that they had raised that as possible reasons to look next at your credit.
Right.
Have you looked at the issue, draw on the reserves to the 10% level, or trying to keep it above that?
No, right. So that has been factored in. There also are concerns about what our choices, not only as a committee, but also just as an administration in the county, is going to affect the AAA bond rating. I believe we are taking prudent measures with this, as well as the department, to make sure that that is not the case. And as you know, too, we're doing the best we can to have an educated guess at what the next fiscal year is going to look like and what we have available to us, what spending is going to look like. While the 10% is looming, the actions that we take from now and in the next budget, we're trying to stay away from it and not in what they're looking at. If things don't change and actions aren't taken, then we get close. And the concerns have been stated. I think that we recognize that, and we're trying to stay away from that. And the decisions that we're making here help get us away from that concern and that threat of it being included in considerations that could potentially affect our increase.
And obviously that
Right.
you're aware of and addressing, and that is the drawdown of the reserves from its very healthy balance now,
Right.
down towards, as they state, the 10%. Then you had also the recommendation in here that came from Prague, whose materials are stale from last summer, but nonetheless, that they were going to, they were asking in their budget submission to go up to the 10.5 debt service reserve. So you've got a twofer.
Right.
If the economy, although I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying and everybody else is saying, this year is good. Collections are good, revenue forecasts are good. Next year it becomes a little cloudier. But if there is a hiccup, you've got no margin left. And also the question becomes, no one knows yet what the state's going to do with the Board of Education and all of the programs it has, even though you don't have a lot of much general funds on your books. They do. You know where they come whenever there is a decline in their projected revenues. They're going to come to you. And it's your decision, but mine is to be very mindful of the pressure that will come with that. You don't have you can't give anything away, not without raising taxes.
Right. Which, again, is not a but not a consideration that we have on our table, and not one that I've had a discussion with the administration on either. But I would say that the analysis is also based on, or also the commentary, which is well taken. If we do nothing, if nothing's done, and the models that were used to come up with the recommendations are met exactly the way that they're suggesting, then we come up to 10.5, we come close to 10%. And these concerns are compounded if something goes wrong. My conversation with the department, with the administration and the members here don't indicate to me that these are limits that we're not trying to go over or come close to. We're trying to do what we can to mitigate those situations, just like when we're being asked for, bond sales and in terms of how much we're sending, we're giving authorization for a certain amount. We have not historically ever actually asked for that total amount. And I think that's what we're looking at here, where it's a situation that if we do nothing and we just see these negative signs and just ignore them, then that's, we're going to be in a tough situation if things don't go as projected. But we're looking at it prudently, and I think we also have a history in this committee to make sure that we're making a conservative choice so that we do have that wiggle room, even though if everything goes exactly as the models project, we're in a better position to be maneuverable and flexible. So.
No model that usually is always wrong.
There we go.
Whether it's me or anybody
Right.
else on an exact basis. The question of the debt service, though,
Which I think we're going to get
and the
into.
rebuild of your reserves, the only way the reserves are going to rebuild is if the economy really accelerates up. And I think we're at the pause of how much flexibility that you have is what happens over the next 2 years. I mean, it's not this year, and it's not really the beginning of 26, but it starts to get into the 26.
Right.
That's my 2 cents.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I appreciate the insight. Liz?
I did want to note that the drawdown of fund balance closer to the 10% legal limit is planned, and it's mainly for capital projects. I mean, just the PAYGO contribution to capital, the one-time spending to meet those needs and offset some of the debt service pressure. And obviously, the county can be looking at that drawdown in terms of capital priorities and weighing those. Correct. So there's discretion there.
On the issue of this is one of your largest capital project groupings in quite some time. Legal capacity, audit of contracts capacity, it's a lot of money that's going to go out the door if it was all to be at one period of time. And that's a management issue. Only you can answer that. But it's a concern of
Right.
how much you want to approve at this point in time. I think that's
Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman,
Councilman?
thank you very much. I had 2 questions. First, to Ms. Irwin, can you speak generally to the idea of blending? Forecasting is not a science, it's an art, right? So can you just speak generally? I know we've done this the previous year. There's a history of doing this, correct?
Yes, in several years, we've looked to a blended average, particularly when the projections are a bit apart. In this case, they're really not tremendously far apart, but as you said, it is an art. It's not a science. And when we're looking, as long as we're keeping our eye on revenues, the ongoing revenues, and we're seeing that we're staying below those, where you fall exactly with your rate is an art. It's a choice that you have to make. And so we've averaged before. Last year we took the 3-year Moody's and averaged it with the 5-year Sage. This year we prefer the 5-year average because it draws on more actual data, more actual results. The 3-year is more in the estimation realm because these data points lag. So we're comfortable using a blended average and not just relying on a single forecaster. It provides a little bit of putting two good minds together rather than just relying on one.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And second question, I know Mr. Crawford brought up this issue of the capital program. If Mr. Reed is there, I'm pretty sure he is, you'll be meeting with each of the 7 council members to go over the capital budget in their district, correct?
He answered in the affirmative. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
We have, and as we've stated before too, we've used the blended average in the past, and we've also not exceeded at the end of the year too. I mean, we set that guideline at the end of the year. We kind of evaluate where we're at, and we've always been, as an administration, all things being equal, been under that recommendation in terms of spending.
Last year, we actually did an adjustment to slightly move up the guideline because there had been, we try to be conservative.
Right. Right. Good. Any further questions for Ms. Irwin? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion for an increase of 4.9% in the spending limit.
I'll move it.
Motion is second.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. Any further discussion on the increase of 4.9%? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Ms. Irwin, I think you're going to go into the debt increase.
Correct. So for the debt guidelines, we can start with debt service. Your decision is whether to align with the county's debt service guideline as presented in the county's debt affordability study, which was provided via email. Such a change would involve really three things. Number one, including component unit capital lease costs in the numerator of the debt service to revenues ratio. To date, the committee has excluded these costs, and that really goes way back in time when the data wasn't as available, and really just with the idea that that decision to fund those capital leases in, say, BCPS is out of the hands of the county government, per se. They could go ahead and take on some leasing without getting an approval first, potentially, at least in a real transparent way. Not that they do, but just that that's the evolution of why we had excluded that in the past. So we would be including that to align to how the county does include that. So that would be sort of pushing up the debt service numerator from where we currently track it. Second, we would be reflecting the full debt service interest costs in the numerator of the ratio. The Office of Budget and Finance recently announced, or a couple years ago announced, that its practice was to budget the full amount of these costs consistent with the past recommendations of the committee. So this had to do with the committee recommending that the debt service interest costs not be netted in the budget, but really rather that the full interest costs be presented in the budget so that some of it isn't getting left out. So this would be including that into that numerator. And it would be consistent now with what Budget and Finance is actually doing. And third, we would be raising the debt service to revenues guideline ratio from 9.5% to 10.5%, because that is the rate that the Office of Budget and Finance is using and has adopted as part of the county's debt policy. Director Reed has assured the committee that such an increase from 9.5 to 10.5% would not jeopardize the county's AAA bond rating. Am I saying that correctly? Yes, he says. So that's really the decision as far that's on the table as far as changing the debt service guideline. And I have a couple handouts. I emailed them to the two members that are online. I'm going to pass them out here. The first one is the current approach, which shows the 9.5%. You can see some detail there. And then the second one is the 10.5%, incorporating these two other pieces in the numerator. Okay. And in this you can see the bond premium funds show up as green. You can see how those were funded off budget, so they weren't captured previously. And you can see the component unit capital leases, which are purple, and those go all the way back, but they became greater really over the past few years. So you can see that as the bond premium savings, as that practice has, the county sort of weaned itself off of that as interest rates have risen. You see those capital lease costs in the component units, which they've grown. And really though, the fiscal year 2025 debt service, the blue part of the bar, which is the traditional amount that we relied on for this measure, it's gone up some from 2024, mainly because of that green part, the bond premium savings going away. But this just gives you some idea how we'll be under the 10.5% guideline.
Right. So while increasing, we're not coming.
Correct. So those are the two things that are on the table. The 9.5% guideline, which would yield, which would be $268.76 million, that debt service expenditures should not exceed that amount. Or if it's 10.5%, the number would be $297.05 million. And that's based on our revenue forecast of over $2.8 billion.
Questions and comments for Ms. Irwin? Discussion related to the request for a 10.9% increase. Well, I'll put this out there too. The spending increase and the debt increase, the conversation with the department has been extensive. I just want to thank them for their willingness to find and carve out time to discuss and to talk about the county's future needs. And also wanted to thank Director Reed for being flexible and candid when we got into more deeper discussions about things that don't necessarily address or that the Spending Affordability Committee doesn't directly address related to policy decisions, but how the decisions we make here will absolutely affect the policy decisions that the administration makes. You helped me, and I know you helped other members come to an understanding of what the 10.5 means and what it requires for us. And I just want to point out for the folks that are listening and also to the other members as well, that the concern still remains about it's not simply up to the legislative branch and the council to make budgetary cut decisions that then eliminate programs that would bring us closer or increase our debt. It's a combination of a combination of decisions that are made between the executive branch and the council, so that we, while are discussing and we'll make a motion to increase to 10.5%, that in out years from here, we're discussing specifically what we can do to curb spending related to our capital budget, or how we can make sure that we're working collaboratively in a strategic way to make sure that the responsibilities that this county has to its infrastructure, to its schools, and to its citizens are being done in a prudent way, in a conservative way, that we know that we're not, one, every year putting our AAA bond rating at risk, and that we're increasing a debt limit with the intent to not actually reach it. So I want to make sure that we put that out there clearly before entertaining a motion to increase to 10.5%.
All the state was put on credit watch warning because of its growth.
Right.
And again, I'm kind of the outlier here, not the elected official. It's your responsibility. It's only my guidance is that, remember, these things aren't additive. It's not it's together.
Right.
And when you're doing with your reserves and you're diluting your credit policies for good reasons, there's no question in looking at your capital budget, the projects are needed. Cause of it goes back years ago, but nonetheless, it's here and now to pay up, but to be very cautious with the economic, as Basu has said, that if there is some format of a downturn, you're right at the edge on something. As you begin to recover yourself over time and go back to your stringent credit use.
Right. Absolutely. And your concerns are shared by the other members as well. I think that's when we first, from the very beginning, we're discussing a 10.5% increase. The implication of that, not in this fiscal year, the next one, but the years that we are concerned about. We're talking about 26 and 27 being well, but then uncertainty after that, and not setting a future council up or a future administration for failure. And I do now believe that we're doing that after conversations with the department and administration. What I do, and what I've just mentioned before too, and this only came from collaboration discussion with everyone involved, is that there is a willingness and acceptance of our concern, but at this point, to not engage in or not entertain the increase also puts our AAA bond rating at risk, because then we would be out of sync with both guidelines from the administration and from SAC, and we don't want that to happen either. We had discussed about what are the different scenarios here, and with 10.5% and going to the increase gives us a pathway to discuss how we don't reach 10.5, but also how we can discuss in the future bringing our projects either by spreading them out or by reducing them to the point where we don't necessarily have to, we don't have to increase again and potentially bring it down, which I think for the members of this committee and also from this council would be a hope that in the next few years, looking at how we're choosing projects and how we're scheduling them out and strategically planning them, that we can actually look at reducing that rate and pursuing that in the future. But that comes from collaboration and not from just this committee. But we also can't bring down the obligations that this council, that the county has made to the public and things that are already in the works to then on this side of it, not give ourselves the flexibility to then fund those projects that have already been committed to. So we are in this balance and do appreciate the concern. And I think that this is the prudent move that gives us flexibility to keep the discussion moving, because if we didn't, we wouldn't even have. Oh, absolutely. Right.
Continuous basis. I mean, that's important.
Right.
Still got a large unfunded liability in the that's got to come down.
Right.
There's a lot on your table.
Yes, sir. So. Oh, go ahead, Liz.
Speaking of pension, I just did want to mention that the debt service guidelines that we're looking at do exclude the pension obligation bonds. That's also done in the debt affordability study. The county actually shows it both ways, but we're focused on the excluding pension obligation bonds piece.
Got it. Councilman?
I was going to move, we increase the debt service to 10.5%.
There's a motion. Is there a second? Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any
Aye.
opposed? Seeing none, the motion passes. So,
Just one add, in reading through the
Please.
credit rating reports, it seems increasingly, although I know it's a separate issue on the Met District, but it seems like the rating agencies are pulling information from you all into their discussions of, looks like the county's going to raise the utility rates and whatnot. That's another one you could get pulled in very, very quickly, and all of a sudden, oh my goodness, look at this mess. And it's not your liability per se, but it is to the taxpayers who are paying all the bills.
absolutely.
The system has had problems, just as the city just raised its rates. Be cautious of going forward.
Sir. Thank you, Ed, for the addition. Sherwin?
We have the total debt outstanding guideline next.
Okay.
And so I've handed out 2 handouts, which I also emailed to the 2 committee members that are online. The first is just the current approach. It really there's no change to the percentage, to the ratio, but the only change is just to put that component unit capital lease amount in the total debt that's being looked at. So really, that's the only difference. So historically, what you're seeing on the chart that only goes back to 2005, as opposed to the one that's a more full history, it's showing the component unit capital leases included in the bars there. No difference in the guideline itself. The guideline would
Remain the same.
remain the same at 2.5% of total assessed property value, which is based on $114.45 billion for FY26, resulting in a guideline of $2.861 billion for the total debt outstanding guideline. So typically, even if there's no change, this is this little tweak with the capital leases piece, but you typically vote it even if there's no change.
Right. Any discussion on the percentage of total debt? No? Entertain a motion to maintain the percentage at 2.5%.
Total assessed.
Remarks, so moved.
I'll second it.
Motion is second. Any further discussion on maintaining the percentage of total outstanding debt, 2.5? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Okay.
And finally, the fiscal policy recommendation options that you have. In recent years, the committee's repeatedly reaffirmed its conservative fiscal policy recommendations, which are important and are as follows. First is that the county should maintain a sufficient reserve on hand in case an unexpected revenue shortfall occurs. As established by Bill 3518, the Revenue Stabilization Reserve Account, we call the rainy day account, must equal 10% of budgeted general fund revenues with the floor level of surplus funds at 7%. So second one, that the second recommendation that the committee makes for fiscal policy is that the county executive should avoid underfunding essential operating budget items in order to fund other initiatives. And the third is that the county executive should strive to submit a general fund budget that minimizes reliance on one-time sources of funding, such as surplus funds for ongoing operating expenses. And also in recent years, the committee has stated that improving the retirement system's funded status should be a top budget priority. So accordingly, the committee has approved exclusion opportunities to allow the administration to infuse above the ARC, which is the annual required contribution, into the pension trust fund to assist in raising the system's funded status. So in response, the county's fiscal year 2023 budget included an additional $50 million contribution to the system, which at the time the administration advised would increase the system's funded status by 1 percentage point. So that exclusion opportunity hasn't been utilized the past couple years, but you could still consider making that allowance and allowing them to exclude that additional funding if they have room for it.
Gotcha. Those were four.
So those were four. The other one that the committee has done is also done something similar for OPEB funding. So if they're to go above the consultant, basically the phase-in plan on OPEB funding, if you were to go above that, to allow anything above that on the plan that's in place to also be excluded. So if you want to keep all those policy recommendations the same, then that's really what you're deciding here.
Gotcha. Entertain a motion to keep the policy recommendations the same.
So moved.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. All right.
Okay. So next up, we have to write our report.
Right.
And so we usually shoot to have that drafted with about a week to spare before the statutory deadline. The statutory deadline is February 15th. So we'll promptly, as soon as we have that drafted, get that to the committee members and ask for quick turnaround feedback if you have any changes to it or questions, concerns.
Right. Before adjourning, I just want to thank all of the members for taking their time and effort and adding their expertise to the discussion. I think that we all recognize looming uncertainty, which is also part of the reason this committee exists, and historically have taken the road of one working with the administration and with our own policy experts and analysis to then make a conservative recommendations that keep us in line with the reason we have a AAA bond rating in the first place. So I appreciate all of your participation and the administration and department for being flexible and engaging with us in this conversation, and look forward to continue to work with you as we work through the budget process. So thank you very much. And that motion to adjourn. Oh, Liz?
Thanks to our Office of the County Auditor's staff
Office
as
of
well.
the County Auditor and Ms. Irwin, the first time taking on as the head acting auditor and being the replacing Ms. Lawrence Melkinson. You've done an amazing job. Thank you so much for your work on this.
Yeah, wonderful job.
Thanks, Liz.
Yeah, thank you.
Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Liz, you did a great job, Liz.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. All right, motion to adjourn. Motion second. All in favor?
Aye.
Stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.